in this episode of the Critical Oxygen Podcast. That's the point of releasing all of these hormones, is to reestablish some level of steady state or balance. And the harder you exercise, the greater that stress signal is going to be. So the greater the stress response is going to be, or the greater the amount of hormones that are released is going to be. Welcome to the Critical Oxygen Podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your endurance potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson. I have a PhD in molecular exercise physiology, and I'm the founder of Critical Oxygen, where my mission is to build better endurance athletes through remote education and in-person physiological testing. Today, I'm joined by Coach Dave Schell, founder and head coach of Kaizen Endurance, for another episode of Fast Physiology, where we do a deep dive on a succinct endurance exercise physiology topic. In this episode, we're going to discuss the stress response of our bodies to exercise and why we release stress hormones like catecholamines in order to reestablish steady state. Enjoy. Dave Schell, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back, Dr. Phil.
Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed our last episode all about the long workouts and stuff like that. And I think a good transition to that is catecholamines and, like what we would think of as stress hormones being released during exercise, because something that happens that I don't think is kind of talked about enough is that during exercise, or just first of all, exercise is a massive stress on the body.
Right.
If you read off all of the physiological things that were happening to somebody during exercise, like increased mean arterial pressure, increased heart rate, massive release of stress hormones, fluctuations in glucose and all this other stuff, and you just read it and didn't give anybody the context of like this person's actually exercising, you would actually think this person's actually dying, yeah. Right? So I think, the next step for us to talk about is like, catecholamines or stress hormones. Why are they released? What are they doing? And all of that. And Dave brought this up. So I'll let you kind of, take it away from here, Dave, and just let me know, like, what do you want to know about, this sort of topic?
Yeah, I guess this has always been something I've been super interested in. And one of the things I tell my athletes, and I've been saying it since I started coaching, is that stress is stress is stress, meaning that whether it's training stress or you had a really bad day at work or you didn't sleep well last night, or, like your body doesn't know the difference. It's all just stress. And so I think it's something, as I'm designing training plans and as I'm setting up somebody's training for the week, I've always had this kind of, and I don't know where it came from or where I heard it, but I kind of have this model in my head where it's like, if somebody does a hard workout, let's say on Tuesday, so they do a really hard, like threshold or VO2 max workout, I have this kind of wave that in my head that on Wednesday and Thursday, it's those stress hormones are kind of coming down, and I don't want to hit them again until I think they're at a good place to like be able to accept that training or adapt to that training. And so to add to that, if somebody has a really hard day, or if they're just like things are feeling really hard today or something like that, it's like, okay, well then that's more stressful today. So like, let's back it off. Right. And so I guess I'm looking for validation in like this mental model that I've created, and that like, and I guess I'll just finish by saying that in my brain, the closer we get to threshold or FTP and above, the more stress hormones are released and the harder it is on the body to recover from. And so case in point, let's say that somebody had a weekend of racing, especially mountain bikers. Let's say they did a short track on Saturday and on Sunday they did XCO. Well, it's going to take them a while to like recover from that and to like be in a place to like have productive training again. And so, yeah, I'm just looking to like talk about more about that and see what it actually looks like in the body.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I would say that typically stress hormone release should be fairly acute or transient. You should see, in response to exercise, an increase in stress hormones. And then when you stop exercise, those stress hormones should go away fairly quickly, right? Your body should balance out. However, when we're talking about stress, it's not just stress hormones, right? It's the damage that was created during the exercise. It's the depletion of the glycogen, the intramuscular triacylglycerols, the potential muscle protein synthesis that needs to happen. It's all of those things that are trying to help your body adapt and reestablish some level of, say, steady state, so that the next time you experience that exercise, it's not as much of a stress on the body. So I would say there's like an acute phase, and then there's kind of a chronic, like, recovery phase of stress. And absolutely 100%, you said, well, as exercise gets harder and harder and harder, we release more and more and more stress hormones. And, that does seem to track very, very well. So let's take a step back and let's just define stress hormones and really what they're there to actually do. So when you start exercise, your muscle starts using energy or starts breaking down ATP very, very, very quickly. Actually, like immediately, because you have to break down energy or you have to release energy from ATP in order to actually uh, make force and have contraction occur. In response to that, your body's energy systems kick in and start to resynthesize ATP in order to allow contraction to continue to occur. What happens, though, is that at the very beginning of exercise, our cardiovascular system is, amongst other things, is not fully ramped up. So if you ever wear a heart rate monitor, you always notice that your heart rate takes a long time to actually reach a steady state. So your cardiovascular system and other systems of your body aren't ramped up to the extent that are actually, what would it be, that are actually optimal for exercise. So what happens is your muscle, because it is not getting adequate amounts of oxygen, starts to accumulate metabolites, and there's other signaling factors that then your brain gets signaled to and is like, oh shit, we got a big stress going on. We got a big energetic stress going on. And then in response, your brain says, okay, well, we need to release hormones, because what those hormones are going to do is flood your blood system with uh, hormones that then act on different tissues. So these hormones, we call them counter-regulatory hormones, but essentially what they are is epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, glucagon are kind of like the four big ones, and there's a few other ones and stuff, but those are the four big ones we always talk about in exercise physiology. And when those are released, those can actually bind to target tissues like the heart, and they can actually increase the amount of beats per minute your heart has and how hard it's beating. So you have from that perspective, they can vasoconstrict areas like in your intestines and your viscera and other things like that, to divert blood away from your digestive tract, for example, and then allow for more blood to be dumped into your muscle. So the release of hormones essentially allows for your bodily system to, or systems to, reach some level of steady state that then allow for your body to continue to exercise for extended periods of time, right? um, Another thing that catecholamines will do is they'll actually liberate uh, glucose from the liver and fat from your fat cells, which will then increase the amount of fat and carbohydrate that are within your blood. And then as they circulate around, they'll reach the muscle, which is demanding a lot of fat and carbohydrate, which will then be uptaken, into the muscle. And, all in all, it's, well, the first and foremost, your body is just trying to protect your brain, from dying, essentially.
Right.
But then secondarily, your ramping up of all of these systems with the release of these stress hormones is going to be favorable to the muscle to get more oxygen to it, more substrate to the muscle, carbohydrates and fats, and allow for greater energy production from aerobic means, which is way less fatiguing than non-aerobic means in a sense. So that's the point of releasing all of these hormones, is to reestablish some level of steady state or balance. And the harder you exercise, the greater that stress signal is going to be. So the greater the stress response is going to be, or the greater the amount of hormones that are released is going to be.
And just to back up a little bit, you'd mentioned epinephrine, norepinephrine, glucagon, and also cortisol. So I think too that people would be like familiar with is epinephrine is essentially adrenaline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then cortisol is what people would call the stress hormone.
Right.
And so what are the point of those two? And like and it's funny, like I'm just thinking about this now. God, probably like 5+ years ago, there was this thing going around about adrenal fatigue, and everybody was concerned about adrenal fatigue, and you can't,
Right.
and that's been disproven. But yeah, so what are the roles of those two, and when does it become, I don't want to say harmful, but maybe counterproductive?
So I actually that's a great question, and I don't know the specific answers to the exact differences between cortisol and epinephrine, norepinephrine. What I will say is that different tissues have different receptors on them, which then perpetuate different signals within the cell. So I know that epinephrine and norepinephrine, those can bind to things like alpha receptors and beta receptors, and there's all these different types of receptors and stuff. And what they do is then they essentially bind, and then the binding of those allows for that signal, that stress signal, to be perpetuated into the cell, because all of our cells are essentially compartments. And then from that signal transduction into the cell, we actually have essentially like a domino effect of like rapid response teams that then go out and do a bunch of things within the cell to help to liberate more substrate and do other things like that. So that was that's a very wishy-washy answer, because I would need the table in order to actually tell you exactly what's going on for each of these different like hormones and substrates, and how they affect things within the cell. But that's all, like, by and large, what's actually happening. And then where extended period, like, this is with anything, if there is a transient time course to the release of stress hormones and then they go away, then that is a healthy response.
Right.
If that response becomes a little bit lower and elongated over time, you're going to accumulate a lot more of that signal over time, right? That's where it starts to become, I think, a little bit dangerous. And a perfect example of this is the insulin response. So we didn't talk anything about insulin, because insulin is not an exercise hormone. Insulin is a storage, rest, and digest hormone. So glucagon and all of those other catecholamines that I was talking about actually act to shut down insulin almost immediately. But insulin, the whole role of insulin is to, or there's a few different roles, but insulin release is stimulated when high levels of blood glucose are present. And then when insulin is circulating in the blood, that actually causes tissues to uptake glucose into those tissues. In response to a meal, we would expect glucose to go up a little bit, insulin would be released, and then glucose would go down, and then insulin would go down. Where this becomes dangerous is when we have chronic levels of glucose in our blood, and then the amount of insulin that's being released is no longer adequate to start to push that glucose into our muscles. So it's this idea of chronic stress that actually then, is kind of forms some level of insulin resistance and high glucose levels over time, which then is metabolic disease or type 2 diabetes.
Right.
So it's all, is the stress acute or is it chronic? If it's an acute stress, then most likely your body is going to have adequate amounts of time to recover from it and other things like that, and then you're all good. If it's extended periods of time of this stress, and I'm talking like more along the lines of hours or days of this stress signal being present, that then results in negative ramifications.
Right. And I guess I would make the argument that, so again, it's not necessarily all training stress, but if somebody has a really stressful job, and so on their day off they go and do this like really hard workout, but then the next day they're back at work and they're under a lot of stress, and then the next day at home they're under a lot of stress. Like, you may just it may blunt that adaptive signal, I guess, is because you're
Yeah.
not like giving your body, like, you're not backing off and allowing your body to adapt to that.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. Is like, it's not just exercise. It's, your it's the mental stress, right? Of working a job, having to provide for a family, just dealing with life in general, right, can be pretty stressful. And if you never have that like on of stress and then off of stress,
Right.
then you highly blunt your body's ability to actually adapt to whatever it is that you're trying to get it to adapt to. Um, so yeah, no, you're 100% right. I think and this is where having a good coach and being able to get from those states of stress and excitement to a resting state are super important. Um, and it's I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges of like the modern world is this like balancing all the stress and being able or trying to, uh, you know, get stressed when you need to get stressed and then turn it off when you're done with it, because that's what's going to allow you to continue to stay adaptable in any aspect of things, right?
Right.
If you're chronically mentally stressed, then that results in things like mental illness, for example. And this is just me kind of hypothesizing, but it's like if you're always stressed about what's going to happen in the future, then most likely you have or have developed some level of anxiety,
Right.
right? So and it's like, well, if you don't have any ability to turn it off, then you're getting just this drip of chronic stress, and then it can result in negative outcomes, right? But if you have like a super stressful day and then you can rest on it, then the next time you go into that stressful work day or something like that, you're like, yeah, I can handle this a little bit better because I did it last time, right?
Yeah.
So that's just one example. I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but that's kind of how I view it.
Yeah, and I guess where I'm kind of going with this, and we talked about this on the last podcast too, is like this hyper optimization, and that people, whether we're looking at Strava and seeing what the pros are doing, or we're following the pros on Instagram and trying to repeat their workouts and stuff, like lots of times, like they either don't have a job or they're working like part time at a bike shop or something like that, and so their whole job is to train and to carry a huge workload. And
Mm-hmm.
most of us, that's not our situation, and so it's like we have to take the context of our life into consideration as well, and think about like what amount of training can you do, what amount of stress can you handle and positively adapt to. And I think
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people it's probably less than they're currently doing. Like everybody's so focused on the hard workouts that they kind of lose sight of like fitness happens in the adaptation between the hard workouts, not
Yeah.
not just killing yourself all the time.
No, that is probably one of the best quotes we've had on the fast physiology stuff. Is like the adaptations happen in the time between the hard workouts, right? And this is where I think a lot of people do get it wrong, with this whole idea of, oh, well, we have to, you have to do your zone 2 training at that zone 2 threshold,
Yeah.
or else you're not getting the adequate stimulus. And I'm like, the amount of stimulus that zone 2 training is going to afford to you as long as you're recovering from it is so minuscule compared to what you could get based off of those high intensity days, that I'm just like, might as well make it 10, 20, 30% less,
Yeah.
because it's already not that big of a stress as it is. So you might as well just adapt to the hard workout you did a day or two ago and then crush your next hard workout. And that's going to make you a better person. It's going to, or a better athlete. It's going to allow you to stay consistent for longer. It's going to allow you to do more specific work, and it's going to allow you to progress over time, right, without overdoing it. So this idea that like um this idea that your zone 2 or your easy work has to in some way be like challenging, I think is overblown. I also think that, it's like for me, for example, and granted, I'm not training for anything other than just like trying to be healthy right now. Um, what my easy days look like are like riding on the bike at a pace where I can't talk this fluently, but it's pretty close to that.
Yeah.
And I just modulate it based on how I'm feeling that day. And I just say, okay, well, don't go too hard.
Yeah.
And, because me being on the bike for an hour here with a few accelerations and stuff like that is going to help facilitate my recovery between the hard runs that I do and allow me to get back, say, tomorrow and do another hard run workout.
Yeah.
Or if I need to have, more of a rest, then I'll just do an easy run workout that day. And then Friday, I can just, hopefully be recovered enough, because Thursday I'll have done another easy bike workout that is unloading, my legs and stuff like that. So then I can go do the hard stuff. So, this started as a conversation about catecholamines, but I do think that training overall is just management of stress and being aware of where that stress is coming from. Whether it's life, training, lack of sleep, really anything, poor nutritional habits, those sort of things, is really important to be aware of. And in my big takeaway is that when the stress response is acute, so it goes up and then comes back down because you have the ability to turn it off or turn it on, then turn it off. That's where the ability to adapt is going to lie the best. And if you have chronic stress over time, it's going to greatly blunt your ability to actually adapt to anything that you're actually trying to do and get better from.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I'm just going to repeat what you just said. I think as my coach, my job as a coach is stress management. I tell people that all the time. And it's not just the on the bike stress, it's the life stress and things like that, and helping you to manage it and kind of ebb and flow so that you positively adapt to it and get stronger, faster, more resilient over time. And so, yeah, stress is stress is stress.
Yep. Yeah. So I hope you walked away with, me confirming your already held bias a little bit, but no, this is,
Exactly.
I think it's a proper bias though. So if you guys have any more questions about this topic or any other topic, shoot us a DM. You can find me at Critical02. You can find Dave at either Kaizen Endurance, or if you want to check out his podcast where we're kind of jumping back and forth for these Fast Physiology episodes, you can find him find it at Training Babble on like Spotify and Apple, or on Instagram at Training Babble Off-Road. I got it right this time. Yeah. At Training Babble Off-Road. Feel free to go and bug him about topics that you want to hear about and those sort of things. We hope you guys enjoyed this conversation, and we'll catch you in the next one.